They say they love your light, but watch what happens when you shine too bright, until you reflect the parts of themselves they've spent years hiding. And when that happens, they don't push you away because they stopped caring. They step back because your presence makes them feel small. It wasn't your kindness that they loved. It was the quiet way you stayed small to make them feel big. The way your silence protected their illusion. You didn't create their insecurity. You just revealed it. And what you thought was love, it starts to look more like quiet resentment wrapped in affection. You know the pattern by now. They're drawn to your empathy like moths to flame. They bask in your understanding, soak up your compassion, feed off your ability to see their pain and hold space for it. But then something shifts. Your natural radiance, the very thing that attracted them, becomes the thing they resent. Jung wrote, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." The people who resent your light aren't really seeing you. They're seeing everything they've rejected about themselves reflected back at them. Your empathy doesn't just comfort them, it confronts them. When you show up without the carefully constructed mask that most people wear, you remind them of everything they've abandoned in themselves, the spontaneity they've suppressed, and the authenticity they've traded for acceptance. And instead of inspiration, they feel accusation. Here's what most people never understand. We don't just project our darkness onto others. We project our disowned light just as fiercely. Think about it. When someone consistently attracts people who seem to love their empathy, but eventually grow to resent it, what's really happening? You're not just being yourself. You're inadvertently holding up a mirror to their unlived life. Your capacity to feel deeply threatens those who've learned to feel nothing. Jung called this the inferior function, the aspects of personality that get repressed in favor of what's socially acceptable or personally safe. For many people, emotional authenticity is precisely what they've had to sacrifice. And then you show up, embodying all of it effortlessly. The resentment they feel isn't really about you. It's about themselves. It's about the painful recognition of who they could have been if they hadn't learned to hide. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the world, the false self we construct to be accepted, successful, or safe. For many people, this mask becomes so convincing that they forget there's a real person underneath. But empaths often live closer to their authentic selves. Your sensitivity isn't a performance, it's who you are. And this authenticity is both magnetic and threatening. People are initially drawn to your realness because it reminds them of something they've lost in themselves. But as they get closer, your authenticity begins to challenge the very foundation of their constructed identity. If you can be real, why can't they? If you can feel deeply and still function, what's their excuse for emotional numbness? If you can be vulnerable and still be strong, what does that say about their armor? Your very existence becomes an uncomfortable question they're not ready to answer. Jung said that we often project our contrasexual aspects, the anima in men, the animus in women, onto others. But there's another layer to this that's particularly relevant for empaths. In a culture that often values thinking over feeling, logic over intuition, performance over presence, many people have had to suppress their more empathic, receptive, intuitive qualities to succeed or survive. When they encounter someone who embodies these qualities naturally, someone who feels deeply, thinks with their heart, leads with empathy, it can trigger a profound unconscious conflict. Part of them is attracted to what you represent, the integrated wholeness they secretly long for. But another part resents you for having what they've convinced themselves they can't have. You become a walking reminder of their own inner split. And instead of using that recognition as a catalyst for integration, they often choose to dim your light rather than kindle their own. But let's be honest about something most empaths don't want to acknowledge. Sometimes you unconsciously invite this dynamic. Sometimes your empathy carries a hidden agenda. Jung understood that every virtue has its shadow. The shadow of empathy can include a subtle superiority complex disguised as caring, the need to be needed disguised as love, emotional invasion disguised as understanding, rescue fantasies disguised as support. When your empathy comes from these shadowy places, others can sense it. They feel the hidden demand beneath your care and the unspoken expectation beneath your understanding. And they resent you for it, not because you're too empathic, but because your empathy feels manipulative. The people who eventually turn on your light might be responding to the parts of your empathy that serve your ego more than your heart. Jung figured out why this happens. Inferiority complexes don't just make people feel small, they make them actively try to diminish others. When someone feels fundamentally inadequate, your natural radiance becomes a threat to their carefully maintained equilibrium. Your effortless authenticity highlights their exhausting performance. Jung wrote about how the feeling of inferiority makes mutual recognition impossible. When people feel inferior, they can't genuinely appreciate your gifts because doing so would force them to confront their own sense of inadequacy. Instead, they unconsciously work to bring you down to their level. They might criticize your sensitivity as weakness or frame your authenticity as attention-seeking. It's not that they consciously decide to dim your light. It's that your light makes their darkness more apparent, and dimming you feels like the only way to feel better about themselves. People who resent empaths often create what's called false intimacy. They come close enough to benefit from your light without ever truly opening themselves to it. They share their pain but not their joy. They seek your understanding but offer no reciprocal curiosity about your inner world. They want your empathy but resent your needs. This isn't a real relationship. It's emotional extraction. You become a repository for their difficult emotions, a therapist without compensation, a constant giver in a relationship that only flows one way. And when you finally set boundaries or ask for reciprocity, they frame you as the problem. You've become too much, too needy, or too demanding. But what you've really become is someone who expects mutuality in a relationship. And for people accustomed to one-way emotional dynamics, mutuality feels like an impossible burden. Jung spoke about how entire cultures can have collective shadows, shared aspects of human nature that get repressed on a societal level. In many cultures, sensitivity is part of the collective shadow. We've created societies that reward emotional numbness, strategic thinking, and surface-level connection while punishing depth and authentic vulnerability. When you show up as a naturally empathic person in such a culture, you're not just triggering individual shadows, you're confronting the collective shadow. You represent what the culture has rejected. You embody what society has deemed weak or dangerous. And the people around you, having internalized these cultural messages, experience your empathy as a fundamental challenge to everything they've been taught about how to be successful, safe, or strong. But here's where it becomes hopeful. Every projection, every shadow encounter is an opportunity for what Jung called the alchemical transformation. The people who resent your light are offering you invaluable information about both their unintegrated aspects and your own. When someone criticizes your empathy as weakness, ask yourself, where do I still believe this about myself? When someone takes your compassion for granted, ask yourself, where do I take my own needs for granted? The goal isn't to dim your light or apologize for your empathy. The goal is to shine more consciously and give more wisely. The process of psychological wholeness in Jungian psychology is individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who others need you to be. Individuation means learning to hold your light steady, regardless of others' reactions to it. It means developing discriminating consciousness, the ability to see clearly without taking on what you see. It means understanding that not everyone is meant to be saved by you, that your empathy is a gift to be shared wisely, not a resource to be depleted carelessly. The people who resent your light are often those who haven't begun their own individuation process. They're still identified with their persona, still projecting their shadow, still living in unconscious identities with collective values rather than authentic self-knowledge. Your light threatens this unconsciousness, and unconsciousness will always fight to preserve itself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who resents your light is to withdraw it, not as punishment, but as a boundary that honors both your energy and their process. Every person must be allowed their own timing, their own journey toward consciousness. Some people aren't ready for the level of authenticity and depth that empaths naturally offer, and that's okay. Withdrawing your light forces them to develop their own inner resources. It challenges them to stop depending on your empathy and start cultivating their own. It creates the very discomfort that might eventually motivate their own growth. And it protects your energy for those who can truly receive and appreciate your gifts. In a world that often punishes sensitivity, Staying empathic is a revolutionary act. The people who resent your light often do so because you refuse to participate in the collective diminishment of human feeling. You won't pretend to be less sensitive to make others comfortable. Your very existence challenges the status quo, and some people would rather silence the questions than face the answers. Jung said that we draw to us what we need for our own growth and healing. Maybe you keep attracting people who resent your light because you're learning something important about boundaries and self-worth. Maybe every person who can't handle your empathy is clearing the way for someone who can celebrate it. Your people, the ones who can truly see and appreciate your empathy, they're out there. They're also learning to shine their own light, to trust their own sensitivity, to honor their own depth. And when you find each other, there's no dimming required. No apologies for feeling deeply. No explanations for caring too much. Just the quiet understanding that empathy isn't weakness. It's the very strength the world needs most. In the end, what they couldn't handle is how your light makes them feel about themselves when they're alone. Incomplete, disconnected, inauthentic. The resentment isn't really about you being too much. It's about them feeling like not enough. But here's what changes everything. Their not enoughness isn't your responsibility to fix. Your only responsibility is to shine authentically and let the chips fall where they may. Some people will be nourished by your light. Others will be threatened by it. Your job isn't to dim yourself for the threatened ones. Your job is to shine bright enough that your people can find you in the dark, and trust that they will, because authentic light always finds authentic light. And when it does, there's no resentment, no dimming, no apologizing for being exactly who you are. There's just the quiet joy of being fully seen and fully celebrated for the light you carry. And maybe that's worth every person who couldn't handle you. Maybe they were just clearing the way for the ones who can. Thanks for watching. If any part of this video made sense to you, let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who might feel it too, feel free to share it.